March 2013 is a milestone for the Tomb Raider series. It was at this time that the first game in the Tomb Raider trilogy was released, bringing Lara Croft and her adventures to the world of fresher gamers. Lara, who had little power, no knowledge of the dangers of traveling to mysterious parts of the world, nor even her age allowed her to use a tool called experience. It was her and one or two friends who believed in her, and above all, a thirst for exploration of the world. But it wasn't just Lara stepping into an unknown world. Old fans of the series also had no idea about the new game. No one was used to a raw, vulnerable Lara until then. Everyone recognized Lara Croft as a smart, agile, and assorted character, and the notion that she now needs her teammates to survive was a little strange. Soon the internet was filled with praise for the latest version of Tomb Raider and reviews that were mostly positive. Rebooting an original and popular name like Tomb Raider is never an easy task, because there is not much room for mistakes, and a few wrong decisions can jeopardize the future and even the past of the entire series. Thankfully, the Crystal Dynamics team knew what to do to not only keep the name Tomb Raider, but the new trilogy as the standard for similar games. I think the reboot of this series was the smartest decision the creators could make to save it. Rescue may not even be the right word, because unlike many of the same age-old franchises, Tomb Raider doesn't have such a rocky history, and with each release, it has been able to satisfy most fans. But with the arrival of a new generation and new ways of narrating, the invincible and perfect character at the center of the story had become obsolete. The introduction of the fragile young Lara Croft made us more able to connect with her and her motivations, which led to her and the franchise's popularity as a whole. Another reason was the better implementation of platforming elements and puzzles. Around 2013, the Uncharted series had become so popular that all games of the genre were under the heavy shadow of the game upon release. The Tomb Raider reboot, though borrowing many of its mechanisms from Uncharted to Lone, was able to somewhat distort this equation and find an identity independent of other games with a good balance between action, platforming, and puzzles. Naturally, the old formula of the series did not have much room for maneuver, and the creators understood this well and were able to publish a modern and interesting title. The first game of the trilogy, titled Tomb Raider with no suffixes and prefixes, was a solid step forward. It was clear from the original cutscene that the creators of the original series have not forgotten, are dealing with a full-fledged Tomb Raider. The point that caught my attention from the very beginning was the believable and lovely characters of the series. As Lara's best friends, Jonah and Sam were easily placed in the heart of the audience, and even Whitman seemed a trustworthy friend at first, despite his mysteriousness. Although the story was heavily focused on Lara, the side characters were able to create a beautiful color palette alongside her. As soon as the storm hit and Lara went missing on a rainy island, it was clear that we were dealing with a story of ups and downs. Tomb Raider then focused on exactly that, letting the gamer on a strange island feel the meaning of the challenge with skin and bone. Gameplay also contributed to this issue. From the very beginning of the game, you will find that the violence of the game is relatively high, and a little carelessness can cause Lara to be slaughtered in the worst possible way. It was also clear that we were dealing with a whole action title, and puzzles are second priority this time. Usually more action means more fans, and Tomb Raider was able to make the audience should not feel relaxed for a moment inside the game with a really good gameplay and countless cinematic scenes. Increasing the action dose of the game also made puzzles more enjoyable. In general, the game had three elements of action, platforming and puzzles put together, which even with a small variety of enemies, did not spark a moment of repetitive feeling. Tomb Raider 2013 was a high-quality action-adventure by the standards of the day, which also won many awards. About a year later, the definitive edition of the game was released, which in addition to providing all downloadable content of the game, there were also improvements in the graphics field. The high sales and new fans it had earned paved the way for the next Tomb Raider trilogy. Two years after the release of the first release and its good feedback, it was time for the creators to be more confident in releasing Rise of the Tomb Raider. Square Enix's strategy for releasing the second game quickly made it one of the best games of 2015, and even one of the best action-adventures of the 8th generation. Rise of the Tomb Raider, although it was released just 2 years after the first game, made some significant improvements to the game. It was as if the developers had just released the first game just for the warm-up, so that with the second game, Tomb Raider was once again one of the best adventure games. Rise of the Tomb Raider, unlike the first game, which had a relatively linear trend, encouraged gamers to explore and adventure as much as possible in the open world. Activities such as hunting or making different arrows and bandages gave the game a new dimension that further immersed the player in the game. In addition, Lara Croft's skill tree was designed to make each person determine their own style of play according to their own interests and abilities. Some people preferred not to get involved as much as possible and to search for more in the world of the game's mysteries. Others enjoyed the smooth action of the game, and if did not kill all the enemies, they did not stop the adventure. Another clever change we saw in Rise of the Tomb Raider was the removal of the online part that the creators had crazily implemented in the previous version. Who really plays Tomb Raider because of its online game? It seemed that by removing this section, the developers focused more on the storyline, and the result was a game that was worth playing several times. The puzzles were also much more interesting in the second part. No matter how much you're a fan of puzzle solving in action games, Tomb Raider does something with its mechanical puzzles that you see, instead of following the main storyline, you've been walking between secret tombs for hours to earn the prize. But the fact is that the tombs themselves and the wonderful architecture they used are so fascinating that even if there's no reward in the end, you can still spend hours wandering around them. For each new mechanism or tool that they introduce to the audience, manufacturers have several puzzles that are solved by the same mechanism. This makes the gamer feel challenged until the last minute of the game and injects him with a sense of improvement and strengthening. In addition, the cinematic scenes of the game were dramatically enhanced in the second installment of the Tomb Raider trilogy. From the very first scene of the game and the collapse of the walls of the tomb to escape from the helicopter that with a bomb and a machine gun to Lara's life, they do not let the audience put down the controller for a moment and distance from the atmosphere of the game. What made these scenes more interesting was the great architecture and lighting of the game. Almost every scene in the second game had the ability to photograph it and peg it to the wall of your room as a poster. The extraordinary degradation of the environment, its charming platforming, and Lara's perfect sound all make you feel like you are watching one of Hollywood's greatest action films. The second game wasn't perfect, but it was built so attractive that its flaws could not be seen. After the release of this version, and a more complete version of the 20th anniversary of the series, everyone was thinking about how the next version would look better. The gap between the second and third editions was slightly larger than the first two, but Square Enix finally released the third and final version of the trilogy in 2018. From the start, the game received more negative reviews than the second version, reinforcing the belief that, in trilogies, the second version is always the best. Of course, no one was saying that Shadow of the Tomb Raider was a bad or a poor game, but they believed that focusing too much on Lara's past and the dimming of the action elements was a problem with the beat of the game. Both were true. The third version explored much deeper into Lara's father's suicide and his obsessive interest. Also, as in the second version, you wouldn't be chased by a helicopter or armored car every few minutes, and you were more relaxed. But did these factors really make Shadow of the Tomb Raider a forgettable title? I think the philosophy behind the beginning of the Tomb Raider trilogy was to focus on Lara Croft's character, and all the side characters, from her father Richard to Jonah and the negative characters in the trilogy, were designed to portray different aspects of her personality. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, with multiple flashbacks dating back to Lara's childhood, directly scrutinized her character to answer questions posed in the previous two versions. An act that may have disrupted the beat of the game, as some say, but was necessary for the final version of a trilogy. Moreover, there's no denying that the library's riddle, which takes place in the first third of game and Lara's childhood, is one of the most fascinating yet challenging puzzles of the entire series. Another objection to the narrative of the third game was Lara's immediate, selfish decisions, which in fact denied her progress from a raw youth to a mature woman. Of course, I have never accepted this defect personally. Selfishness and boldness are two sides of the same coin, and a character like Lara Croft should be expected to do the same. In addition, I think there were two scenes in the game that showed how much stronger and more serious Lara was in the course of the three games, and that wasn't the vulnerable Lara of the first game. The first scene, after Lara and Jonah's boat is attacked by helicopter, when the injured Lara barely reaches the shore and is attacked immediately. Where his patience runs out, she utters the famous "Don't try me" and fills the audience with a sense of power. The next scene takes place a little later in the oil refinery and after the false news of Jonah's death, where she is attacked from the ground and the air and she falls into the pond and passes out for a few seconds. Then she comes out of the water, and with a face where death and vengeance can be seen, she fights for his friend and slaughters all the enemies. Until then, I think that such scenes had been vacated in previous versions, as we saw in the third version. As for the lack of action scenes, it should be said that this is absolutely true. Shadow of the Tomb Raider focuses much more on the elements of adventure, puzzles, and platform than on the action. Even in this game, there are two levels of difficulty, one for the action and the other for puzzles. Puzzles that still won't disappoint you, and some of them will take some time to solve. Artistic graphics are uproaring in this game. I remember personally turning the camera for a few minutes as soon as I entered some of the game environments, especially hidden tombs, to digest the staggering details of the ambient architecture. It was as if I didn't want to just do my homework and leave. But did the lack of action hit Shadow of the Tomb Raider? I personally don't think so. I think the other parts of the game were so interesting that the audience didn't feel the need to constantly engage with the enemies. In addition, there was still enough cinematic and action scenes in the game to keep fans hydrated, although you should have been a little more strategic and avoided direct conflict in many places. The diversity of enemies and weapons together created enough room for large-scale destruction. Despite its shortcomings, Shadow of the Tomb Raider marked a sweet and honorable end to the Tomb Raider trilogy, and we haven't heard from Lara Croft or her adventures for 6 years. Without spoiling the end game, the Tomb Raider trilogy was a pretty good sequel. First, it made room for more Lara Croft stories, and secondly, she managed to add new fans to the series with 3 high-quality games that will follow Lara Croft's adventures with each new release after the trilogy. More importantly, as one of the first female characters in the world of games, Lara Croft has once again established her popularity, and now gamers know more about her past, and therefore are better able to communicate with her. Where the creators plan to lead this series is a question fans are asking themselves. With the introduction of Unreal Engine 5, there was some news about the new game from the series, but no one said when the game would be released. After very positive feedback from fans and excellent sales, it's likely that the creators will be thinking of a new version. Specifically, the Tomb Raider trilogy actually tells the story of young Lara, and we all know that with the Lara we saw in Shadow of Tomb Raider, there's a lot more potential for a new version now. Due to the approaching 30th anniversary of the series, the potential of the 9th generation consoles, as well as the countless potentials that exist on the horizon of this series, it is unlikely that we will not get news of the latest version of this series these days. Until then, we have to wait.